She was known as the Queen of Anatahan, a woman who amidst madness, chaos, and survival became the central figure in a harrowing battle for power. But her story isn't just one of survival, it's a tale of manipulation, strength, and a struggle for control over the island's broken, desperate men. This is the story of Kazuko, the Queen of Anatahan. Welcome to Mystery Vault. Today, we uncover the haunting true story of Kazuko, a woman stranded on the isolated island of Anatahan. The waves broke against Anatahan's black volcanic shores on a humid June morning in 1944, washing away the last traces of civilization along with the splintered remnants of their boat. Kazuko Higa stood at the water's edge, her kimono soaked with seawater in fear, watching her dreams of a coconut plantation dissolve into the Pacific mist. Behind her, the island rose like a dark promise, or perhaps a threat, its jungle-covered slopes disappearing into low-hanging clouds. Her husband Shoichi's hand found hers, a gesture that would soon become a memory. Neither of them knew then that the island had already begun its slow, inexorable work of transformation. The American planes that had forced them to seek refuge here were long gone, their drone fading into the constant chorus of waves and wind that would become the soundtrack of their lives for the next 6 years. They weren't alone. From the jungle's edge emerged figures that seemed to materialize from the shadows themselves, 30 Japanese men, their clothes already showing signs of island life, their eyes carrying the weight of isolation. They were sailors, laborers, and soldiers, all castaways from various vessels and units, all already changed by their time on this volcanic refuge. The island revealed its nature slowly, like a predator toying with its prey. At first, it seemed almost generous. The survivors found they could fashion tools from aircraft wreckage scattered across the volcanic rocks. They learned to catch fish using spears made from sharpened aluminum, to collect rainwater in salvaged fuel tanks, to coax sweet potatoes from the dark volcanic soil. They built shelters from palm fronds and pieces of a crashed B-29, creating a village that straddled the line between two worlds. The deaths on Anatahan started with what seemed like accidents, but soon escalated into intentional killings. Initially, the men on the island found themselves at the mercy of the harsh environment, and some deaths were easily attributed to the dangers of the jungle, the sea, or the wreckage of the B-29 aircraft. One early example was the death of a man named Shoichi, who fell from the northern cliffs while scavenging aircraft parts. It was assumed to be an accident, a simple mishap of survival, but it was the first subtle indication that things were changing on the island. The deaths became harder to ignore as time went on. After Shoichi, a sailor from one of the earlier shipwrecks, was found dead in the ocean, his skull crushed by a coral rock. While the men initially dismissed it as another unfortunate incident, suspicions began to rise. The murder wasn't an isolated event. Over time, men began to disappear, and their bodies would be found in the jungle or at sea, showing signs of violent death. A young soldier was discovered in a coconut grove with deep gashes across his chest. These were not accidents. They were the results of violence and anger, and they hinted at a growing instability among the survivors. With food becoming scarcer and the harsh conditions taking their toll, the social order began to break down. Kazuko, who had initially been seen as a symbol of hope, was becoming a focal point for the men's frustrations and desires. Her presence altered the dynamics among the survivors, and competition for her attention fueled rising tensions. The tipping point came with the Night of the Long Knives, a violent confrontation that shattered any remaining illusion of cooperation. The specific cause of the outbreak of violence was never fully understood. Some accounts suggest it was sparked by a dispute over food, while others point to jealousy over Kazuko. What is clear, however, is that it was an eruption of long-simmering conflicts among the men, many of whom had grown paranoid and distrustful of one another. The night itself saw men using whatever tools they could find to fight, as they had no access to firearms or traditional weapons. By morning, 4 men were dead. The survivors, covered in blood and exhausted from the night's violence, now saw each other as rivals rather than comrades. The concept of survival had shifted. It was no longer about working together, but about outlasting others in a deadly game. In the aftermath, the survivors seemed to realize that the island had become a place where only the strongest would survive, and their relationships with each other became increasingly strained and distrustful. They had been stripped of their previous identities as soldiers or civilians and had become something else entirely, individuals driven by raw survival instincts. Kazuko, once the symbol of potential rescue and unity, became a powerful but precarious figure on the island. She was both an object of desire and a symbol of power, something to be coveted and feared. Her ability to navigate the men's desires and suspicions was crucial to her survival. Her role was complex. She was neither a leader nor a simple victim, but a survivor, manipulating the social structures that had emerged among the men to her advantage. After the night of the long knives, killings continued with greater frequency and brutality. Murders were often the result of small disputes that quickly escalated, fueled by hunger, paranoia, and the constant stress of living on an isolated island with no clear end in sight. One particularly chilling death was that of a mechanic who had helped repair some of the B-29 aircraft. He was found dead one morning, strangled with a piece of wire. The manner of his death was precise, suggesting that someone had planned the murder carefully, knowing exactly how to strike without leaving a trace. His death added to the growing paranoia and suspicion among the survivors, making it clear that no one was safe. As the years passed, the island became a place where trust was a commodity no one could afford. The men who had arrived with some sense of shared purpose had fractured into isolated groups, each man looking out for his own survival. The line between civilization and savagery had blurred, and any semblance of order was lost. When rescue finally came in 1950, the island had completed its work. The USS Kokopa's crew found not civilians but creatures of the jungle, dressed in parachute silk and tree bark, moving with the fluid wariness of predators. Some had to be coaxed from the island like feral cats, their bodies shaking at the prospect of leaving the only world they now understood. Kazuko emerged last, her hair wild, her handmade dress a testament to survival and adaptation. The rescue team saw something in her eyes that made them step back, something that spoke of 6 years of walking a knife's edge between power and powerlessness, between being worshipped and being prey. They returned to a world that had moved on without them. Japan was different, rebuilt from war's ashes, but they were different too. Some could never again sleep in beds, preferring the hard embrace of floors. Others hoarded food, their bodies remembering hunger even as their minds tried to forget. Kazuko carried the island with her until her death in 1981. She married again, had a child, lived what looked like a normal life. But sometimes, in the dark hours before dawn, she would wake to the sound of phantom waves breaking on volcanic shores, to the memory of men's voices carried on warm Pacific winds. The island remains, its slopes still rising from the Pacific like a dark memory. Its jungle has reclaimed the village, the graves, all traces of those 6 years when 31 humans stripped away their civilized veneer and became something else entirely. Only 20 would leave the island alive, carrying with them a story that would blur the lines between history and legend. But perhaps the true story of Anatahan isn't about survival at all. Perhaps it's about the thin line between civilization and savagery, about the masks we wear and what lies beneath them. Perhaps it's about how quickly we can adapt to the unthinkable, and how that adaptation changes us in ways we can never undo. The island keeps its secrets now, wrapped in jungle shadow and volcanic mist. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, you might hear whispers of a queen who was never really a queen, of men who became something other than men, of an island that turned civilization inside out and showed its inhabitants their own true faces in the mirror of its savage heart. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more captivating tales. See you in the next one.